This is James Walker, and welcome to Real Talk, Real People. This is the podcast that turns the mic over to everyday people to hear what they have to say about the issues and problems we face as a society. Hello, folks. Thank you very much for joining us again this week. The conversation is about legalizing marijuana here in Connecticut. And folks, this is a critical week to talk about it. The governor is going to release his budget on Wednesday. And it is my understanding it's going to include legislation to approve the sale of recreational marijuana. And for many people, that is a good thing. Lamont, our Governor Lamont, and many lawmakers have been for legalization. And more than 60% of residents here in Connecticut approve of recreational marijuana. It's likely that New York will approve it. Massachusetts has already approved it. Many sales going on there. New Jersey just approved it. There are even big billboards along our highways directing residents here in Connecticut to cross the border to buy marijuana. So this is really a very important week, as my guest today is pointing out. And my guest is Adam Wood. He is the co-director of the Committee to Regulate Marijuana in Connecticut. And he is here, folks, to tell us why Connecticut should legalize marijuana. And his reasoning goes way beyond dollars and cents. And he makes a lot of sense. Let's listen to what he has to say.
Thanks, James. Really appreciate the opportunity today to talk about this important issue. My name is Adam Wood, and I'm the co-director of the Connecticut Committee to Regulate Marijuana. And we are an organization set up to advocate for legalization here in Connecticut.
And where does that process stand right now?
Right now, there is this week is a really critical week. The governor is going to release his budget on Wednesday and likely propose with that a piece of legislation that would legalize marijuana in Connecticut. In addition to the governor's bill, there are two different bills out already on the issue of marijuana legalization, addressing different aspects of the issue from labor to other types of regulation.
Okay, what do you think the holdup has been? Because I do know that we do have some lawmakers on the governor's side, but there's some opposition too. So why do you think has been so much opposition to legalizing that here in Connecticut when it has made the rounds in New Jersey and neighboring states? Why do you think it has been such a problem getting it legalized here?
Well, I'm glad you asked that question. And I'm going to answer it by kind of, pointing to the state of New Jersey. They recently passed a referendum that was a statewide ballot question. We don't have statewide ballot initiatives here in Connecticut the same way we do in other states, like, for instance, New Jersey or California, where the public votes. But I will note that the public here in Connecticut is very much in favor of legalization. Polling from last year before, and going back as far as a decade has showed that Connecticut residents greatly favor legalization. Upwards, anywhere between 60 and 70% of the population statewide approve of legalization because they know right now people in the state of Connecticut have access to marijuana, whether it's legal or not, and that regulation will provide the benefit of public health provisions and public safety provisions that could really contribute to a lot of positive development here in the state.
So when you say it will include legislation such as health provisions, what do you mean by that? What health provisions are we talking about?
So right now, because the market is completely unregulated, for instance, if you go to get a product from someone currently, There's no such thing as child resistant packaging. There's no testing of those products for mold or other contaminants. There's no, as you know, we've had this issue of fentanyl being spiking and
Sure.
combining fentanyl with lacing fentanyl with other products like marijuana and other drugs. Regulation would bring a guarantee of public safety and public health standards, which is a complete change from the system that we have in place today.
Now, how is this a benefit to the state and people? Let's take the state first. How is this a benefit to the state?
So, from the state's perspective, again, right now, a lot of the state's public safety resources are dedicated on this issue, and some of the negative impacts of an illegal market are that the state focuses resources on law enforcement resources on some of the downsides of this industry and some of the public safety challenges and unsafe conditions that are created as a result of an all cash, completely unregulated, unsafe economy. So I think number one, the state would benefit in terms of public safety and public health improvement, and regulation will bring that. I think another main advantage was highlighted by a recent report out from the University of Connecticut that highlighted a major economic impact that legalizing would have for the state. Really good paying jobs could be created in agriculture, manufacturing, retail. And that study of economic impact showed that Connecticut could see well over 19,000 jobs and could also uh, appreciate revenue from taxing of marijuana to an amount of about $180 million per year. And so I think that would be a huge benefit to the state at a time when new revenues are very hard to come by, and new jobs, quite frankly, in this pandemic economy, are very hard to come by. And so I think those are some of the primary benefits to the state.
Now, many people, and I guess your opponent, people who oppose this, say that should not be the reason that we legalize marijuana. The tax benefit, the economic boon, because we're talking about people's lives, and they say we're not looking at what's going to be, according to them, increased traffic deaths from people driving while being high, which will increase hospital costs and visits, addiction treatment, environmental damage, crime. So, what do you say to those people? Because those are real concerns. What do you say to them?
What I would say to them is that all of those negative conditions you just described exist today, and in a completely unregulated, unsafe market. Today's reality is that we do have addiction, we do have public safety concerns, we do have people driving under the influence, and all of those concerns are prevalent today. And by the way, not all of those are related to marijuana.
Yes, of course.
In fact, many studies have shown that marijuana is far safer than legalized substances like alcohol. And those are empirical facts. So what I would say to those opponents is regulation brings the ability and the possibility to put in place a system that can address those harms and those potential pitfalls and provide a revenue stream that would allow some of those issues to be addressed. In other states where legalization has happened, like Colorado and Washington, money that comes in terms of those taxes goes towards drug abuse prevention programs that have been shown to reduce, youth use. So I think there are a lot of benefits that come from legalization, and pretending as though marijuana impact, that marijuana use doesn't happen today, and that there aren't perils from a completely unregulated system, is really just that, pretending. Um, so I think it's time for us to address the reality that this is something that exists, and tackle it head on and put in place regulation and utilize. I agree with those opponents that revenue and jobs shouldn't be the reason to legalize. Public health and public safety should be the reason to legalize. But it's certainly a benefit that comes along with legalization, and I think provides a way to address and tackle some of the other issues you mentioned that currently we have no budget for.
One of the other things I've often wondered about in this long, decades long battle to legalize marijuana is how big a role does the ABC lobby play in this, the alcohol lobby? How big of a role do they play, or do they play a role in it at all?
I certainly wouldn't want to speak for anyone else. So I'm not sure exactly, how to speak to that particular question, but I will say there are certainly lots of different interests involved, and this is a public policy debate that isn't happening in a vacuum. There are lots of different interests involved in this debate, and lots of them registered to lobby on this debate as well. And so there's definitely folks who stand to gain and lose, and like any other public policy issue, those folks are weighing in and with their perspective and trying to impact the law.
You're listening to Real Talk, Real People, the podcast that turns the mic over to everyday people. Now, I don't know if you know this, and if you do not, it's fine. But I do want to bring it up. I do understand in the governor's new bill surrounding marijuana that there's going to be some benefit to low-income communities written into the language, and that there is going to be some benefit for men and women who previously were incarcerated for selling it. Do you know anything about that? Or have you heard through the grapevine that there might be something, being proposed?
Yeah, so I don't have all the details of what's going to be proposed later this week, but what I can say is that I know the governor and his team are very much focused on how would legalization, how could it benefit the populations that have been negatively impacted the most by an illegal drug economy. And I know the governor cares about that. I know his team cares about that. And I know, quite frankly, legislative leaders really care passionately about that issue because they're communities that they represent. And I think some of the things you're likely to see, addressed in a bill would include, as you said, further decriminalization so that folks that are caught for, relatively minor, violations
Sales.
or have a
Right.
pathway out, and that folks who've been, convicted of minor issues in the past have a pathway out of that. I also know it's important for this administration and the governor and the legislature to focus on equity in the new economy created for this industry in Connecticut. I know they've formed an equity commission that has been meeting since the start of December on a weekly basis, I believe, to talk about how what kind of opportunities could be created for those communities and for folks from those communities to participate in this new economy. It's going to be as I highlighted through that Yukon study, there is the potential for an enormous job creation and a lot of revenue, and we want to make sure, and the governor certainly wants to make sure that those communities impacted stand to benefit from that job growth and that economic growth in the state.
Do you see a decrease in illegal street sales once marijuana has been legalized in the state? Do you think that illegal street sales will go away?
So I don't think that I don't think we have enough information on that issue at this point to speculate. But I certainly think if folks are given a legal path uh, to pursue that, 9 times out of 10 they pursue that legal path, and I think that's what our goal is here, is to give folks a legal way to do something they're already doing. and hopefully the benefits will get out there. As I said, I think there are a variety, such a wide variety of benefits to consumers, right, from a
Right.
public health and public safety standpoint. That at some point those the market, right, will drive those that conversion. Because I know if I was, someone who was a consumer, I would be thinking about where does this product come from? What is it, right? It seems
Right.
like
No,
a
you bring up
question.
some good points when you
Yeah,
talk about fentanyl and all the additional little additives, that could be added to street pot, so to speak.
yeah.
That could be harmful. So you make that's a strong argument. That is probably the strongest argument you can make for people going to the legal source in order to buy it. Now, the governor has talked about regional coordination on marijuana policy with surrounding states. Is that a good plan? Do you think?
Well, I think we're at an interesting crossroads in the public policy debate right now. You've got an incoming federal administration talking about, sort of presenting an opportunity that this issue could be dealt with federally, which would be the ideal way to address this issue in an ideal world, right?
Right.
Because even with regional legalization, there are still um, issues with with the industry in terms of cash versus credit, and the ability of this business to be able to transition out of a cash economy, and then and just it being illegal to cross the border, right? Even if it's legal in both states, it's illegal to cross the border because of federal law. So there's a
Right.
lot of complexities driven by the overarching federal uh, issue. But that said, I do think it makes sense. I agree that with the governor and with the other regional governors that it sure makes a lot of sense to move in parallel. Uh, we have our state. Massachusetts, as you know, has already legalized, and New York seems very likely to legalize this year, and New Jersey has already passed legalization as in the process. So as a region, I think it certainly makes sense to move forward in this way. It creates the ability uh, for standardization of some of these public safety and public health practices. It creates a market. Some people have said, well, how do we, on the public safety side, right? Some people have said, well, how do we address, marijuana use in the workplace or, in the public safety context? And some of that involves technology and some of that involves training, right? And those are things that if there's a regional need for, a regional demand for, will come to the region, and it gives us the ability to have best practices and standardization. And I think all of that will ultimately benefit consumers and benefit public health and public safety.
I have one further question. Do do you have an idea in terms of dollars and cents legalization would bring approximately?
So,
Has it Go ahead.
yes. So the Yukon economic impact study showed an estimated revenue to the state of about $180 million per year.
And that money would go toward treatment and so forth, or is that outside what is being will be? Is that profit all profit, or is that money the government is going to use to do these other programs and little things that are built into the bill to legalize it?
So that would be that would be revenue the state brings in. That's not total sales. That's the revenue off of taxes the state
I
would
got
bring
you.
in from sales. And it could be used on a variety of different things. I certainly think the state and state leaders are focused on how can we implement public health, public safety measures with those monies? How do we create opportunities for communities impacted? And I think all of those, and how do we, how do we put funds towards recovery programs, et cetera. So I think all of those things are likely targets for spending with that money, and I think the state's envisioning using that additional revenue for those needs. But the details of that will be revealed later this week.
And I'm assuming that once legalization comes forth, because I can't imagine that they're not going to that this bill is not going to pass. I'm assuming that the way people get their medical marijuana patients get their marijuana by going to a dispensary and so forth. I'm assuming that that's the way it's going to be for recreational marijuana. You go into a dispensary to buy it. Is that the idea?
Yeah, and again, not all of the details are available, but I think that's very much the idea. I think it'd be similar to if anyone has been to Massachusetts to or Colorado to purchase recreational marijuana. I think you're looking at a very similar system, and you'd be going to a brick and mortar location and purchasing there, and um, so I think the system will be very similar.
Well, Adam, really, I thank you very much for taking the time to speak to us. And truthfully, Connecticut has a big decision. They can say no, and more billboards will go up pointing the way for Connecticut residents, telling them where you can buy it legally. Or, well, Connecticut is a state that is normally takes bold action on social problems. But this one, they're far behind the eight ball, and let's hope they pass that bill and so that we can end this what I consider to be a lot of useless crime and a lot of useless arrests and a lot of useless deaths. I think in some cases.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. I think the state has such an enormous opportunity this year to really benefit from this regional push and create uh, economic opportunity, address social justice issues in the state through decriminalization, and also address two fundamental primary objectives, which would be public safety and public health, and provide a much better policy and system than our current failed prohibition, which, as you said, has led to so many countless loss of life and cost our state really, really heavily. So I'm optimistic. I think their legislative leaders are committed to the issue. The governor's committed to the issue, and I think we're going to have a very thoughtful debate on it. And hopeful that by the end of the calendar year, we'll be on a path towards legalization in the state of Connecticut. And I'll share one other fact with you. Connecticut was unfortunately one of the last states to undo alcohol prohibition in the country, and so I hope that doesn't become something that I hope we're not the last to do it on marijuana legalization, and it looks like we won't be with the dedicated leadership and commitment to the issue we have right now.
You've been listening to Real Talk, Real People. If you would like to be on the show, have a comment about the show, or perhaps you have an idea that the show should explore, give us a call at 203-605-1859 or email us at realtalkrealpeoplect@gmail.com. And remember, start your Sundays with my column in Hearst, Connecticut newspapers statewide, and start your Mondays right here at Real Talk, Real People. Have a good week, folks. We'll talk again next week.